Okay, should we get started? Yeah, we got short time, so whew. So my plan was, this morning I talked a lot about how agencies need to change in order to get the best of community. But this afternoon I thought I'd talk more about how communities need to change and how do we really get broad and inclusive community engagement. Because community in itself isn't necessarily a good. There are communities of white racists we call Nazis. And there's communities we call gangs. And I think that really the only valuable communities are the ones that are broad and inclusive, where everybody's engaged and you include everybody. And when I meet with people in agencies, oftentimes they say, well, why would I want to work with the community? And when they talk about the community, they're talking about those same few individuals that are in every city of the world who have really big mouths, right, and very small constituencies and say, I speak for the community, right? And nobody's behind them, and they don't bring a lot of value, right? So I think it's really important to think about how do we really create broad and inclusive community engagement. So that's what I was going to focus on. Does that sound what you're up for? And I know somebody had a question about liability. That always comes up. I'm happy to talk about that. And then there was also people interested in having more discussion about how this agenda fits with the whole thing around collective impact. So Michael said he'd come and join us for the last part of the workshop so we could have a little more discussion around that. But I hadn't planned on that, so I got a lot more to cover than I got time, so I'm going to go really fast, okay? Okay? Is that okay? Okay. But if I'm going too fast, let me know. I'll slow down. If you have questions, I just want to make sure it works for you. Does that sound like? Okay. So let's go. So keys, I want to start off with just the keys to opening your community to broader participation. Remember I said in my talk, I said Robert Putnam said the biggest thing breaking down community is television. Okay? People say they don't have time for community, and yet they spend an average of several hours a day in front of the television. I've been stuck in hotel rooms for the last few nights. I've watched a little bit of television. I thought, oh my God, if this is our competition and we're losing, we're doing something terribly wrong. If we can't make community more interesting, more satisfying than television. And I think the problem is that in our community work, we have forgotten how to have fun. We've made community work our cross to bear. We've made it drudgery. It's like somebody's got to do it. And who wants to follow us if we have that kind of attitude, right? I've got a friend who says, Jim, the problem getting people involved in community is those GD activists. I said, GD? What are you talking about? He said, the grim and determined. It just cracked me up because it describes so many of the self-proclaimed community leaders I know in Seattle who always love to complain. They're always negative. And some people gravitate to negativity, but most people gravitate to hope. It's like, why would you get involved unless you think you can make a difference? In many ways, those GD activists become the gatekeepers and they keep everybody else away, right? So I got another friend who says, why have a meeting when you can have a party? Right? Think about it. The purpose isn't who can endure the most suffering. The purpose is to build relationships. And can't you do that a lot more through fun than you can through meetings? So why do we always resort to meetings as a way to try to bring people together? Okay? So I just had a couple quick stories just to share the power of having fun from a couple places. One is Elgin, Illinois. I was there, I was giving a talk, and I went around the neighborhoods giving a tour, and I saw this big blue wooden tulip in front of somebody's house. I said, what's the story? And he said, well, there's this guy who collects junk. He can't help himself, and he collects more and more junk. His wife gets on his case and makes him take all the junk back to the dump. But every time he comes back from the dump, he's got more junk than when he left. You know this guy. Yeah. And once he went and he found this gigantic blue wooden tulip. He says, man, that is too good to let go to waste. So he brought it back home. He planted it in his front yard. He told all the neighbors, come over Friday night because I'm having a blue tulip party. And all the neighbors are scratching their heads because nobody ever heard of a blue tulip party before, but they were curious. So they came over. God, they had the best time. They had a barbecue. The kids were playing. They had a band, and they were playing. They met all their neighbors. They had so much fun that the next Friday night, that blue tulip showed up in front of somebody else's house. And that blue tulip now has been traveling around the city of Elgin for 10 years. Every Friday night in front of somebody else's house. And all week long, the neighbors are walking around trying to figure out where's the blue tulip going to be this week, right? It's built community in a way nothing else could have because it's fun, it's engaging. I mentioned I recently moved to Vashon Island, an island right off of Seattle. And there we have a community theater there, just a small island, and the community's really kept it going, because it can't afford it on its own. So we have all kinds of fundraisers for it and things. But they did a fundraiser for the local school, and they call it Night at the Oscars. And you can go watch the Oscar ceremony on the big screen. But what's really cool is if you pay a little extra money, a limousine pulls you up on the back, picks you up on the back side of the block, and drives you around to the front. And the paparazzi's there, and you feel really special, right? Taking your picture, you're off on the red carpet, and there's just, we watch the Oscars, and then there's a red carpet, and people walk down the runway, and there's prizes for best dressed, and there's prizes for best pajamas. Yeah. But just one of many things that we do on the island. It's just a lot of fun. A second lesson I learned, and this is right, I was a community organizer in the Saul Alinsky style, and Saul Alinsky said, if you want to change the world, you don't start with the world as you want it to be, you need to start with the world as it is. And a key part of that is starting where people are. And the closer you involve people to where they live, the more likely they are to get engaged, right? So you might get more people out citywide or Tasmania-wide than you would in like Hobart. You might get more people out in Hobart than you would in a neighborhood of Hobart. You might get more people out in that neighborhood than you would on a street. But you're never going to get as high a percentage of participation than if you involve people right on the street where they live, right? Because if it's island-wide, people are going to say, somebody else will take care of it, right? If it's on your street, who's going to step up if I don't, right? And if I don't get involved, my neighbor's going to know I'm not involved. They're going to be in trouble. And on your street, you can see immediate benefits, right? Because you're taking action very locally. Second part is starting where, I should mention that. My daughter, Katie, she's a school teacher in a very, probably the most troubled school in Seattle. She's in middle school, which is the most troubled age. She works with special education kids who are all immigrants and refugees. None of the parents ever came to the school for the parent-teacher conferences because they weren't comfortable. So in the summer, she goes out and knocks on their doors until they let her in. She goes to their house, and she meets them, builds a relationship. And then she's built her whole curriculum around the cultures of the different parents. So every month, they're in a different country. And the parents come in, and they share their food, or they share their music, or they share something special. And they feel comfortable because they're bringing their own expertise, something they're comfortable with. But at work, and now they feel comfortable in the school, so they come for the parent-teacher conferences. And the kids are so proud to have their parents be there up there in front of the class. So it's just the whole principle. You need to start where people are, right? Second part of starting where people are is to start with their language and culture. When I was doing community organizing in Seattle, I was working in a very multicultural community, so I was clear I needed an interpreter. But even if everybody's speaking English, we need to be clear we're speaking the same English that they're speaking, right? And increasingly, we use our professionalized language. We use really fancy terms like asset-based community development to mean something really simple, which is just build on your strengths, right? And we don't use language people understand. They think they don't know enough to get involved. They don't have enough expertise, or they don't even understand what it is we're talking about, right? Another example, and also being cognizant of their culture. Another story about a school. So I have a friend who's Latina, and she was in the SeaTac neighborhood. And she was concerned that her kids weren't getting a good education in the schools. And so she met with the principal, and he said, well, the problem is that the Latino parents just don't care about their kids. That's why they're not getting a good education. She said, what do you mean we don't care? He said, well, if you really cared, you'd be at the Parent-Teacher Association meetings, and we never see you there. She said, I went to one of the meetings, and this guy named Robert had made all these stupid rules, and I couldn't figure them out. So I stopped going. Robert's Rules of Order, right? And so she started up her own organization that was all Spanish-speaking, Para los Niños. And they have a much higher percentage of participation than the PTA had. So starting with people's culture is really important. Third, start with their networks. that too oftentimes we're just dealing with the networks that are organized around our agenda, and we think they're the only group in town. You know, it might just be the Ratepayers Association or whatever, however the neighbors are organized in your community. And we forget that just about everybody's already organized. They just don't belong to that association. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of networks in every community. You know, people organize around faith-based communities. People organize in schools. People organize at the block level. Formal groups, informal groups, sporting groups. You got so many sporting groups here. Hobby groups, youth groups, elders, all kinds of networks. So if you really want to get everybody engaged, you need to reach out and identify what are all those key associations, particularly the ones that involve lots of people or the ones that involve people who are currently underrepresented in your network, right? In Seattle, we had a mayor who ran on a platform of improving our schools. Our city has nothing to do with the schools. It's a separate jurisdiction, but it was a hot issue at the time, so that's what he ran on. Well, rather than just form a blue ribbon commission after he got elected and calling it good, he said we're going to organize an education summit. So he charged us with going out and reaching out to all the different ways people are organized in community, not just the people who are organized, the teachers and the students and the parents, but we reached out to the unions. We reached out to the faith-based communities. We reached out to the seniors, because everybody has a stake in the schools. And we organized 30 gatherings all over Seattle in one day. Had 3,000 people turn out, because again, that principle is starting where people are. 3,000 people turned out, and we had discussions about what's good about our schools, what needs to be improved, and what the people said was we need to make our children safe, healthy, and ready to learn. That our teachers can't do their work when students come hungry, when they come from child abuse. So that's the role of the city. People were so excited about that vision, we put a ballot measure on the ballot that asked people to vote to tax themselves to pay for before and after school programs. Family support worker in every school, clinics in every school. People voted overwhelmingly for it because it was their idea. But you have to work through all those networks. Fourth, start with their passions. Too oftentimes we're leading with what we're passionate about, or what we get paid to be passionate about, or what we got a grant to be passionate about. And then when nobody joins us, we say, God, people are apathetic, right? Nobody is apathetic. Everybody cares deeply about something. Now, some people are frustrated, some people have given up, but they still care. So if you really want to get people engaged, it's much better to start with a question than with an answer. Right? What keeps you awake at night? What are your dreams for your family, for your community? Because if you can tap into what people care most deeply about and give them a sense they could do something about it, they're much more likely to get involved than if you just spend a lot of time trying to convince them to care about what you care about. Right? And then the fifth one I learned is start with their call. I learned this from a friend who's a duck hunter. My wife hates this story because she's a bird watcher, right? But it's the same principle. Every duck will respond to a call. There's just a different call for every duck, right? So I'm still learning the ducks here. So we've got, you have wood ducks, right? Wood ducks. We have loons, coots, mergansers, mallards. Anyhow, every duck responds to a call, just a different call for every duck. My friend says too oftentimes in our outreach, we just sound the loon call. And we wonder why only loons show up at our meetings. In fact, everybody, you get what you call, right? So in fact, everybody will come, we just need to sound their call. So oftentimes, the only call we use is the meeting call. I didn't say the mating call. Mating call would be kind of interesting, right? But the meeting call, and for a lot of people, that is the worst call in the world. People know they go to that first meeting, they're going to be in the sign-in sheet, they're going to be sentenced to meetings for the rest of their life. That's what happened to a lot of you, right? And a lot of people don't see results from meetings. One meeting just leads to another meeting, leads to another meeting. Nothing ever happens, right? A lot of people are shy, and they're told, look, if you really care about your community, you're going to come to our meeting. So they come, but they just sit there. They don't feel like they're contributing anything. That's how much they care. They actually show up. So if we really want to get everybody engaged, we need to use all the calls. For that person who's shy, they may feel comfortable one-on-one as a tutor, as a mentor, making a difference in somebody's life. The social call, we know that works. People come out for food, for music, for booze, right? We shouldn't apologize, because it's a great way to bring people together. I like the project call, because with projects, unlike with meetings, it's not a lifetime sentence. There's always a result. There's a role for everybody, for the young people, for the elders, the construction workers, the people with disabilities, the architects, the artists. And in the process, and people would never come to the meetings, right? In the process, people build relationships. And once people build relationships, then they're more likely to come to some meetings, because you need a few meetings as well. But we always lead with the meetings and wonder why the same people keep showing up, right? Need to use all the calls. So I want to share just an example about starting where the people are. This is in Darwin, in England. Community of about 50,000 people, relatively low income. They tried to figure out how to get broader participation. They came up with a really clever idea. They went to IKEA and bought some really cheap living room furniture, just enough to fit in the back of a van. So they've got a coffee table, they've got a stuffed cat, they've got a vase with flowers, they've got a rug, now they have a sofa, and they call it the Idea Sofa. They set this up in very public places, like they'll take it to the front of the church on a Sunday morning, what I call the bumping places, where people bump into each other, right? Those are key to building community. Or they take it to the sporting field on Saturday afternoon, or they take it to the mall on Friday night, and they set it up, and it just looks weird. So people are kind of attracted to it. And people who come by are invited to sit down on the sofa and share their idea for what would make for a better Darwin. So it attracts people who would never, ever, ever go out to the meeting, right? And when people have an idea, they're invited to come to the school on a Saturday afternoon to develop their idea into a proposal. So here they are, developing their ideas. And then they have kind of a speed dating thing where they share their ideas with each other. And then at the end of the workshop, they pitch their idea to the whole room. And everybody gets to vote on which projects they're going to support with up to £1,000 and their time. There's no application form, there's no contract. The only requirement is you come back in 6 months and tell your story. Through that process, 37 projects emerged in the first 6 months, most led by people who had never been active before in their communities. So these women came together and formed a soldier support group to clean up the local cemetery. Young people organized an environmental organization, the Green Cycle program. They worked together to clean up the local estate and plant daffodils everywhere. They worked with the kids to build a skate park. And then they organized a scarecrow festival, including the invisible scarecrow, right? But 37 projects in 6 months because they did things, they went where the people were, started where the people were. Rather than trying to get everybody to come to their venue, they went where the people were, to their bumping places. Rather than pushing their own ideas, they went and listened to the people's ideas. It makes a huge difference when people own it. Third lesson I learned about getting people engaged is while it's important to start where people are, you don't want to leave them there. People need to see results. People are feeling so powerless these days. When I was doing community organizing, I was organizing in a very low-income neighborhood, and I was trying to show by bringing people together you could have power, right? So I'd organize people around problems in the neighborhood. So I'd knock on a door and say, "Are there any problems in the neighborhood?" And they'd say, "Why? You can't fight City Hall," right? Or I'd knock on the door and say, "Are there any problems in the neighborhood?" They'd say, "Why? Are you a lawyer?" And the implication was that only lawyers and politicians have any power in our society, which is a pretty sad indictment of a democracy, right? So we try to give people a sense that by banding together through collective action, they can make a change. So we didn't start with world peace, because it's kind of hard to see results, right? We didn't start with climate change, because it's kind of hard to see results. Doesn't mean we shouldn't work on those big things, but people are never going to work on the big stuff if they don't think they even have power to make change on their own street. So you need to think big, but start small. Small, winnable issues, small projects. Give people the sense that through collective action they can make a difference. And once people have that, then they're more likely to work on the big stuff. They just aren't going to start there. Fourth, don't sit on your assets. And I talked about this one before, but I think this is one of the most important, is recognizing that everybody in our community has gifts to give. You know, gifts to the head, their knowledge, gifts to the heart, their passions, gifts to the hands, their skills. but that we put labels on most of our population that label them by what they don't have. And then we wonder why they aren't active in our communities, because we have defined them out of community. Do you know the story of stone soup? Some yes, some no. I'll tell a really quick version. So it's right after the war. Soldiers are coming through the countryside. They're really hungry. And they get to this little village and they say, do you have some food you can spare? And they say, sorry, we don't have anything, because they've hoarded what little food they have. And the soldiers say, that's okay, we've got a magic stone. If somebody will lend us a kettle, we'll make stone soup. So one of the villagers brings a kettle, they put the stone in, they add water, they put it on the fire. So the soup's going to be fantastic. But you know, it'd be even better if somebody had a few herbs. So somebody brought a few herbs. Somebody else brought a few scraps of meat. Somebody else brought a leek. Somebody else brought a carrot. Every villager brought a little something. And when that soup was done and they ate it, they just were blown away. They never had such delicious soup before. And they marveled at the magic of that stone. But of course, the moral of the story is the magic isn't in the stone, the magic is in community. That is the meaning of community to me. Recognizing that no one person has all the gifts we need to build community, but collectively, we've got everything we need. So it's about how do we lift off those labels and focus on everybody's gifts. Okay. Fifth, lead by stepping back. It's about new kinds of leadership. So many of the community leaders I know behave in the same way of the politicians that they're critical of, where they want to grab all the power to themselves, or they're complaining, God, I've got to do all the work. I'm working 24/7. Nobody will help me. Well, nobody wants to help that person, because this person is so controlling and thinks they're the only one who can do it right. So the best leadership is a person who divides that leadership task into smaller pieces and realizes no one person has all the gifts. One person might be a good facilitator. Somebody else might be a good welcomer. Somebody else might make a really good apple pie that would get people to come, right? You need all those roles. And if you can break it up into small pieces, people are much more likely to step up than if one person is trying to do it all. Tom Peters said, good leaders don't create followers, they create more leaders. Right? And I mentioned the iron rule of community organizing. Never do for people what they can do for themselves. And I love Lao Tzu's quote, when the best leader's work is done, the people will say we did it ourselves. Nothing's going to happen if it's just one person's idea. It's got to be broadly owned by the community. Ready to move on? Questions? Okay, so I just want to share a few tools before Michael gets here, okay? So one tool is learning conversations. It seems really simple, but it's something we forget. So this came out of community organizing. Ernie Cortez is somebody from San Antonio, Texas. He was trained as a community organizer in Chicago. He went back to San Antonio to do organizing after his training. First thing he did was 1,000 conversations with people. Took him 3 years. But when Ernie had his first gathering, 25,000 people showed up because he laid the groundwork. And so oftentimes in our community work, we want to cut corners. And we just put out press releases. We put up posters. We send out blind emails hoping somebody will respond. And it's no substitute for sitting down and having conversations with people. Now, I know you don't have time to do 1,000 conversations. So what I'm suggesting is be strategic and identify what are those networks in your community that you want to connect with. What are those associations that involve a lot of people? Or those associations that involve people who are currently underrepresented in your community work? And sit down with the formal or informal leader and have a conversation. It only takes 45 minutes. You get a cup of coffee out of it, right? And there's 3 things you're doing through a learning conversation. And those are the 3 things that will get people engaged. First one is finding out what they care most deeply about. What are they passionate about? You can't find this out through a survey. It's really about, you can only find it through a conversation. What's at their core? What is it that if you worked on it, they would get involved because it's what they care most deeply about? Secondly, the thing you're trying to find through a conversation is what are their gifts? What do they like to do? What would they like to share? How would they like to contribute? Because people love to give their gifts. And a third thing is through the process of having the conversation, you start to build a relationship. And relationships are the key to community, right? Aren't you much more likely to come out for something if somebody you know personally asks you to come, rather than just seeing a poster or seeing something in the paper, right? Second tool is to do asset mapping. So I want you to be careful about this one. I can't tell you how many places I've been in Australia where they say, oh yeah, I know asset mapping, and they show me this beautiful map they've made of all the strengths of the community. And I said, so what'd you do with it? Well, we hung it on the wall. The purpose isn't to create a map. The purpose is to create change. So asset mapping is valuable to the extent it helps you make change. So I don't like to spend a lot of time mapping, because how would you keep it updated? What would you do with it, right? I know so many people who said, oh, we can't do asset mapping until we get a grant so we can hire somebody to go out and do the asset map. They missed the whole point. The point is not for the professionals to do it, for the community itself to do it. Because what it does is changes the way you start to think about yourself. So many of our communities have internalized that map that we've created of them, which is all their needs. And they're always looking outside for all the resources. So it's about getting people to change their mindset, to focus on what they have rather than solely on what they're missing. And that will only happen if they do the mapping themselves. So one of the things I like to do is just a one-day treasure hunt. You might just give the kids cameras and have them take pictures about what they love in their community. Put it up on in the community center, or put it up on the side of the grocery store, just to remind people about their strengths. I was in the Willowgee Community Center in Melville. And it's all Aboriginal. And the young people had taken photos, and they had a permanent gallery there just to remind everybody in the community about their strengths. So everything from the strengths of the young people to the strengths of the natural environment, the kookaburra, to the esteemed elder in the community. But it's there as a permanent display, just to kind of keep that in people's minds about what are the strengths of our community. Another tool I love is visioning. Oftentimes we get bogged down with current crises, and we have disputes over emergent issues, and we're trying to come together at the time where there's lots of controversy. It's really hard at that point. I'm a huge fan of thinking about what's a positive future. What do we want our community to be like? What's a common vision? It's much easier to unite around that, right? So I just want to share a story about that, and it's also an illustration about how agencies can do their work in a different way, okay? So this is a story about senior services at King County. And senior services, King County, first of all, is the next layer of government up from the city of Seattle. So it's a large geographic area that includes, it might be the size of Tasmania, I don't know. It's, well, geographically it might be the size. Population-wise, it's millions. But it includes small towns, small rural towns, and suburban cities, and the city of Seattle. And Senior Services manages all the senior centers in King County. And they also manage the senior programs like Meals on Wheels and that kind of thing. Denise Klein, who's the head of Senior Services, came to me one day and says, Jim, we've got a huge crisis. Every year our budget's getting whacked more and more and more. And meanwhile, our population is quickly aging. Same story I hear every place I go. She says, we got to do work in a new way. So we organized gatherings that we called Aging Your Way. And we invited boomers and older people at the town level, at the neighborhood level in the cities, to come together in gatherings like this. And we had about 100 people at each one. And people sat around tables. And Denise started off with a great exercise. She asked people, close your eyes and think about when you are first old. And it really shook up people like me who've never wanted to think about that, right? So here people are considering that question. I love this woman's expression. She's not quite sure she wants to go there. Yeah. And this guy's kind of having a good time with it. And then when people are in that frame of mind, I ask people around their tables to do a little discussion about what would your neighborhood or your town need to be like, both physically and socially, to allow you to age in the way you would like. What would a senior-friendly community look like? And then I gave each table 20 minutes to collectively draw their vision of a senior-friendly community. And then each table got a minute to present their vision back to the room as a whole. And then we had a graphic artist, not nearly as good as the one we have here, but we had a graphic artist who took all those visions and created a composite vision for each place. So here's the composite vision for one neighborhood. What was interesting was how similar the themes were across the tables. But what was really fascinating to me was that not one of the priorities that was raised by the people was something currently being done by senior services. It showed the importance of listening to the people and having the people develop their own vision rather than always out there trying to just provide services and programs for the people. So here's what we heard. We said one thing we heard. We spent a whole lifetime gaining skills and knowledge and building relationships. And now we're just valued for our needs. We're just valued as clients. We want the opportunity to contribute to our community. Second thing we heard, right now in senior services, all we see is a bunch of old people. It's so boring. We want to be able to interact with young people. Third thing we heard, we spent a whole lifetime screwing up the environment. We want to give back. We want to live in a green place. We want to have sustainable energy. We want to have community gardens. It's not something senior services does because it's just seniors. Fourth thing we heard is right now, every stage of our life, we have to move to a different place. We want to be able to age around the people we know and love, the people who we know will support us. So we want universal design. We want walkable communities. We want good access to services. We want good transportation options. So, well, we don't have any additional money to do any of these things. So if you want any of these things to happen, you need to stand up and champion it. So we did kind of open space, and people stood up and championed their project, their idea. And this is what resulted. We had a group of seniors that came together to clean up, work with the kids at the school to clean up the woods, create a trail system. They get together for work parties every weekend, working across generations. We started up a time bank. Do you know time banks? You might know it by a different name. But it's where people join a network and say, hey, I'm willing to give an hour of my skills to somebody else in the community in exchange for an hour of somebody else's skills that I need from within the network. And what I love about time banks, everybody's time is valued exactly the same. The lawyer is the same as the ditch digger, is same as the carpenter, same as the plumber, same as the child care worker. Everybody's the same. It's a great way for people on the margins of the economy to get their basic needs met, but it's also a great way to build connections across people who are different. So we're using it a lot now to have young people support elders. So young people might take care of the yard of an older person so they can stay in their home. They might drive them to a doctor's appointment, to the grocery store. They might teach them how to use a computer. And then an older person might help the younger person learn a craft or learn a trade or make them a great meal or teach them the history of the community. It's really powerful. So anyhow, we started up time banks all over King County now. We've got little time banks all over the King County out of this process. Boy, I missed a slide here. Oh, I don't know where it went. But there were all kinds of other projects. We did, 3 different groups came together to start up senior co-housing projects. 3 different groups, 3 different virtual retirement villages are starting up, where they're coordinating services so people can get services right in their own home, but also having neighbors come in and provide those services for free. About how do we support each other in the community. We started up, some seniors organized walking maps. Another one organized a lifelong learning website. We did a gathering just for the gay lesbian community. A whole series of projects came out of that. In my neighborhood, they said, well, the strength of our community is we have many different cultures. Let's organize a world dance party. So volunteers organized a world dance party. We had people there from 12 different cultures, each teaching each other their dance, right? And they were all generations. We had so much fun. So much fun, in fact. Yeah, here they are. You know, everybody from this woman, this age, down to this little girl, all dancing together. It's great. She was our DJ. But we had so much fun. Now we do it every month. And the number of, just hundreds of people. We're always learning new kinds of dance. But totally community-initiated effort. And then they say, well, this is great that we're doing all this as a community, but there's some things we can't do so well. So we organized a summit where we brought people together across all these gatherings with elected officials, with funders, with United Way, and said, here's what we're doing as a community to achieve our vision. And here's where we need help from you. We need some policy changes, right? Around transportation, around walkability. And they were very responsive because there were hundreds of people with a shared vision and because the community was a real partner. They weren't just coming in making demands of government. They were stepping up, doing things themselves. That's how much they cared. Makes a big difference. So again, it was done out of kind of a silo department. It was out of senior services. I thought it was a good move forward. If I had you might want to think about doing this around child-friendly neighborhood. What would a vision look like? But even better, what would a healthy community look like? Rather than start with our agenda, let's bring people together around shared agendas. And you get much more interesting solutions. And people take much more ownership. And people don't have to decide which group am I going to care about most. Do I care most about the seniors or the people with disabilities or the youth or the new immigrants or what, it all comes together. I had one more story, one more tool. Or do you have questions? Oh, no, I got a bunch more tools. Yeah, I got a bunch more. How am I doing? Oh, shit. Okay. This is sort of the same process I talked about before with open space. We did this in public housing. Very multicultural. And it was an organization that got a grant to create a healthy community. And they advertised, and in High Point, I think there are more agencies than there are residents. And they got a grant, and they put up posters about, come to a gathering about how to create a healthy community, and nobody showed up. So they did the sickest thing in the world. They started paying people to come to their meetings. They had a paid advisory group. And this paid advisory group came up, they asked them what would create a healthy community, and they came up with a long list, but they were all things for the agencies to do, because that's how everything gets done in High Point. Well, the agencies didn't have any money. So that wasn't working. So they asked me to come in. And I said, well, could you get your neighbors involved, your friends? They said, well, God, fitness, nutrition, not our biggest priority. I said, what do you care about? They said, we just want to create an awesome community. I said, would people really come out about how to create an awesome community? They said, well, if we had good food. I said, well, I just have a little bit of budget. I could pay for the ingredients. Could you cook the food? We had this incredible multicultural feast. People are so proud to bring their own dishes. So we got a huge turnout for that. Then they said if we had entertainment, people would come. I said, what kind of entertainment do you have in your community? And one of the seniors said, I belong to a line dance group. And they showed up, and some of them even had walkers. It was so hilarious. But the music was so contagious, the kids jumped up and said, can we do this with you every month, right? And then they said if we had raffle prizes, people would come. And I said, what could you raffle? And somebody said, well, I do knitting. I could make a stocking cap. Somebody else said, I make a great pie. I'll bring a pie. Somebody else said, I could pledge a couple hours of gardening. We had so many prizes, we were raffling for a half hour. And then I had people do some visioning about what an awesome High Point community be like, and do some brainstorming about what kind of actions could move you towards the vision. We came up with this whole list of actions, and then you know what happens, right? Everybody gets their dots, right? You put your dots on your favorite ideas, right? And then at the end of the workshop, we count up the number of dots, we put it in a planning document, we put it in a file, and we never see it again. You been there? Yeah. That's why I've turned so many people off to this stuff. They don't see any results. So we were really clear, none of this stuff is going to happen unless you take responsibility. So this woman said, I just moved here from China. I'd like to start up a tea house as a way to kind of create a bumping place. There were some small elders in the corner who said, we don't drink tea, we drink coffee. Okay, we'll have a tea and coffee house. So they worked together to start planning that. This guy said, I like to exercise, but I'm a terrible organizer. If people will help me organize the class, I'd be happy to lead it. This young woman said, I love to play soccer, but because of my religion, I can't play outdoor soccer. I want to start up an indoor soccer league. This woman says, this is incredible multicultural feast we made tonight. How about if we start up a multicultural catering company as a way to make some income and share our gifts with a larger community? This guy, Solomon, he was the most poised of all. He just stood up there and he says, you know, all my friends in all the other neighborhoods, they got parks, playgrounds. I want a swing set. And it just tugged at everybody's heartstrings, right? And there were some elders in the corner who said, we do regular walks around the neighborhood for exercise, and we get tired. How about if we create a park with a bench and swing sets? They came together 6 months later to build that park. Here they are building the bench. And the housing authority says, you can't do swing sets because of liability. And they said, well, Solomon's absolutely counting on it. We're building swing set. So here's the swing set, and here's Solomon. He's so happy. Yeah. Now, not every one of those projects happened, but a bunch of others did. They got the local pharmacy to stock fresh produce because there was no source of fresh produce in the neighborhood. They started up their own community garden, their own community orchard. They started up a craft group where they're teaching each other crafts, and now they're making sweaters for Nicholsville, which is a homeless encampment, watching out for people worse off than they are. All kinds of projects. And if you think about it, every one of those projects improved the health of the residents. Every one of them. But we never would have gotten there if we just started with health. It worked because we started with what the people cared about, with their agenda, that they owned it. One more tool. I talked a little bit about the Neighborhood Matching Fund. We started in Seattle. And the idea of this program was to meet communities halfway, and projects been a priority for the community, but hadn't been a priority for City Hall. So we said, so I recommend to our council that we provide money to those groups as a cash match in exchange for the community's equal match of volunteer labor valued at $10 an hour, and or donate goods and services valued at the going rate. And I said, how about if we make this available to any group of neighbors? So this isn't for the nonprofits, not for the staffed organizations, just neighbors who want to come together, maybe get around some of those gatekeepers, just do a project. And how about if we just fund one-time projects, because the idea is to build a capacity rather than creating dependence. And how about if all the funding decisions are made by the neighborhood leaders themselves, right? So I took this idea to our council. It was very controversial. Why should we put any money into projects that aren't our priority? We don't have enough money for everything that is, right? Good question. But finally, at a vote of 5-4, they approved $150,000 for that first year. That first year, with that money, we supported 22 community self-help projects. They were so popular that the next year our council voted unanimously to increase the fund to $1.5 million. And they subsequently increased it to $4.5 million. So as I mentioned before, now there have been over 5,000 projects done over the past 25 years, evidence of them in every neighborhood. The city's $60 million investments leveraged $85 million in community resources. And tens of thousands of people have gotten newly involved with each other and with their government in a positive way. So just some more examples of projects. Building new playgrounds. This is the first playground. It used to be every one of our playgrounds looked exactly the same. I think our Parks Department got a good deal, right? Now, each one, and now they've rebuilt every playground, every school, and every park through the matching fund. And each one is different. It reflects what's special about that community, about their values. So the first playground to be developed was in Alki Elementary School. They had their design meetings. Some of the kids showed up in wheelchairs. And they said, we want to make sure every kid can access this playground. So they built the first wheelchair accessible playground in Seattle. We see over and over again the innovation that comes out of community. This is in Carkeek Park, where the neighbors worked for 20 years to clean up Piper's Creek to make it better salmon habitat. After 20 years of work, they finally got the salmon to come back to their neighborhood. They said, this is great. We got salmon back. Now we need kids back. We need a playground. One of the kids at the design meeting raised his hand and said, I want a salmon playground. The adults are all scratching their heads because nobody ever heard of a salmon playground. But a local artist said, I've got an idea. And he built a 19-foot-long salmon that's so big you slide in the mouth and you come out the tail. Here's where you go, and then you climb into a cave, you climb over boulders, gives kids a sense of the struggle that salmon go through to get back to the city of Seattle. So here's where you go in. It's pretty scary. And then you slide through and you end up in a foam rubber sea. This is a problem property under our freeway. Underneath was good for nothing except holding up the freeway. Lots of public safety problems, illegal dumping. Young people went under there and said, this is the perfect place for something we've always wanted but haven't been able to find the land for. A BMX track. What an ingenious idea, and it's always covered from the rain. And I swear, we'll talk about the liability issues, right? Yeah, yeah. This is another neighborhood association. This is where they do Sleepless in Seattle, you know, the Floating Homes Association. So the neighborhood association worked with an alternative elementary school for kids at risk and taught them how to make wooden boats. And then they actually sail the boats. So they formed the first, the first African-American woman Commodore in the history of yachting, I think, was out of this school. Finney neighborhood. They fixed up an old school basement that wasn't being utilized anymore and turned it into a youth center. We provided all the materials. The kids and their parents did all the work. Lots of murals. Involve people from all ages, painting out the graffiti and creating what people love about the community. This is a group of young people, young men, who had gotten involved in gangs, and they wanted to get out. So they formed a group called Youth 180 as a way to support each other to help get out of gangs so that there was some safety in numbers. And through the matching fund, established a safe house where they could hang out together and where they could recruit other young men to get out of gangs. And then these young men worked with the senior center and had some discussions about what should be the future of the community, what's the history, the heritage of the community. And together they designed a mural, and they put it up on the side of the senior center. So cool to see these young guys working with these seniors on a joint project. Whew. Yeah, so this is my website and my, I forgot to put this up before, my email's on there, my phone number, my address if you want to stop by. I got links like to the ABCD Institute, to information about my book. There's all kinds of stuff on there. So take a look at that. I'll open up for questions, but somebody asked me to just address the issue of liability. Should I address that one right away and then open it up? Does that sound good? Yep. It's the first question that always comes up. I say, you know, I'm amazed when I'm going around how similar people are everywhere. People have everybody's got the same basic instincts because we're all humans, you know. And bureaucracy is the same everywhere. Whether I'm in Beijing or Seattle, it's the same. And it's always this issue of this red tape. It's always the reasons why communities can't do projects. Always looking at the downsides rather than the upsides. So when we started the matching fund, I knew there'd be a lot of interest in parks projects. So I met with the head of parks, and I told her, I said, great news! We're going to have a matching fund. We're going to have all kinds of volunteers out. We're going to be building new parks and new playgrounds. It's going to be great. Oh, no. We don't want people messing with our parks. And I bit my tongue and listened to her. Whose parks are they? Yeah. I bit my tongue, and I listened to her, and she had very legitimate concerns. She said, Jim, you're talking about getting money out to neighbors who aren't even incorporated. We can't legally do that. So what we did is we said, okay, we're going to team them up with a nonprofit organization that can serve as a fiscal agent, or with a credit union. And then their job is to handle the money, and the communities group is to focus on the project. It's a great division of labor, and we give a little bit of money to the nonprofit or the credit union for the fiscal agency fee. Second issue was around liability. So usually the nonprofit has liability insurance so that the group's covered during the construction process. If they aren't, then we use a little bit of the matching fund to cover liability insurance during construction. Third, our city is self-insured. So we just need to make sure projects are built to the safety standards of the departments. So we require pre-applications from applicants. We give it to the appropriate department so they can review it against their standards. They can also review the budget, give a technical review to the application, and then give feedback to the applicant so that when the final application comes in, hopefully they can support it. If they can't support it, we won't give it to the citizen review group. It has to be signed off by the department. And they've really loosened up over time, really loosened up. Maintenance was another issue. She said, who's going to maintain these? I said, well, the community will. They put so much work into these projects. They'll take care of it. She said, but they can't take care of it because we have union agreements. I said, okay, well, then your workers can take care of it. She said, but they don't have time. So I couldn't win. So what we decided to do is work out a maintenance agreement before we sign a contract. And usually it's a fight over who gets to maintain it, right? And generally the rule for parks is if it's an existing park that's being rehabbed, then it's the Parks Department's responsibility because we don't want to put anybody out of work. But if it's a new pocket park or a community garden, then it's the community's responsibility because the Parks Department doesn't have enough resources, and also it's so stupid to have a community garden that isn't maintained by the community. I can't tell you how many cities, the community garden movement's huge right now, right? So many cities I go to, city government's out there trying to build the community gardens for the people. And then they wonder why nobody's using them or maintaining them. It just, we gotta lead by stepping back and make way for community initiatives. The more we push stuff, the more it's ours. Did that answer it? Yeah. So we've helped hundreds of cities around the world start up matching fund programs. You don't need $4.5 million. Most cities do it with $25,000. Just a little bit of money as an incentive to get people thinking about what can they do for themselves and to supplement what they can't do with their own resources. If it's too much money, then the nonprofits are trying to figure out how to get their head under the tent, right? So just a little bit of money. But the best value is we figured out how to take down the red tape. So we worked that out at the front end. So when every city I go to, their community groups want to do projects. And they get to council and they're told all the reasons why they can't do it. And they get so tired of hitting their head up against the wall and just dealing with lawyers. They just want to do a project. They don't want to deal with all this red tape. So figuring that out is really important. So cities like, I share the story of Wodonga, they did that through a matching fund. They also started, I forgot to tell the kids, they started up a dog park as well. That was their first project. Sydney has a matching fund. Port Phillip has a matching fund. Newcastle has a matching fund. They're all over Australia now. All right. All right. Yeah. Great. Yeah, they're all over the place. Other questions?
Yes, I don't work in the sector. I'm retired, but it seems to me like I don't want to bring any negativity into this because it's such a hopeful couple of days, given us so many ideas.
But better to raise it now than when you go back home. Yeah. Okay.
I live here.
Right. Okay.
But because of, I mean, you obviously started this many, many years ago and you built it up and slowly, and that's how it should be.
Right.
The times now.
Right. I know.
Everybody hear me? The times now
are urgent.
Are urgent because the jobs have gone. You know, we've seen all our jobs disappear in every sector, and if the ones that haven't disappeared have been, you know, scaled down to casual work. And the people in this community, in this room, are carrying a lot of the problems,
right, yeah.
Which is not fair.
Right.
But we know we've all got to do something, and we've all got to do it. We've all got to participate. We've all got to contribute. But the trouble is with how we are now, and down here with 500,000 people, because I keep saying this to everyone, it's even worse because people are competing for their jobs, and they've got to keep reapplying for their jobs that they've been doing half their lifetime in many cases. And so if you ask those people, look, how about we start this? Oh no, I don't want my employer to find out that I've been involved in this because they might consider it's too political. Well, but that is
okay.
That's
so what you're saying is no different than any place else in the world.
Oh yes.
It hit us a lot earlier. You know, huge budget cuts and much more severe. And the UK is where I'm doing most of my work. And I tell you, this stuff is taking off like crazy in those places because people are realizing the old ways weren't necessarily working. And the other thing is it's about reconnecting so that people, I mean, yeah, it's been 25 years, but stuff started happening immediately. Other places in the US where people see themselves, the problem is too many places, we just treat people as if they're customers or clients. The inverse relationship is they think of themselves only as taxpayers. And they get that very narrow way of thinking that the last speaker described. In Seattle, and so we've got taxpayer revolts across the United States. In the United States, people can vote to cut their taxes. And we see that over and over and over again. We see it with the Tea Party. In Seattle, people are voting to increase their taxes because it's their ideas. It's about how do we make democracy work again. So it's about these small projects, but it's also about building community. It's also about reestablishing relationships with government so people start feeling some ownership of their government again. And so the government, I think sometimes even progressive politicians, sometimes especially progressive politicians, are trying to get stuff over on the community. They think they have the agenda figured out, and they're doing things in a very top-down way. And they've been their biggest enemies, their own biggest enemies. And we need to recognize that progressives also have an interest in community, and that community isn't just a conservative value, right? And that democracy is something we need to bring back. And every country in the world has taxpayers. They have taxpayers in Beijing. Only democracies have citizens. We got to bring that back. In Seattle, we did bottom-up planning. Involved 30,000 people in developing their own plans, where they hired their own planner accountable to the community. We looked through the plans for common themes, and we put those on the ballot. People voted overwhelmingly to tax themselves an additional $464 million for new and improved, 27 new and improved libraries, 13 new and enhanced community centers, 100 new and enhanced parks, because it was their idea. Democracy works. So it doesn't happen overnight, but things do. Some small things start happening, and it all connects if you really think it through. And the other thing I want to just quickly say is I know it's hard work. I try to pump people up because I know it's hard, and I want to give you hope because I truly am hopeful. And part of the reason I'm hopeful is because I get to do this work. I have a real privilege. I'm doing this work in every corner of the world. I'm doing this work in India. I'm doing it in Taiwan. I'm doing it in Canada, New Zealand, Maori communities. Everywhere I go, there are people like you who are working hard to make their communities better places. And that's what gives me great hope. There is a huge growing community building movement. And oftentimes in our communities, we wonder, what difference am I making? Because I'm working at this scale, and meanwhile, the world's going to hell. But what gives me hope is that this movement's happening. It is global, and it's growing. So I think we need to keep asking the questions you're asking, keep thinking about how do we make connections between the local and the larger issues, but we can't give up. We've got, I have, there's so many crises that are moving us in a new direction. I have a good friend who says, Jim, you shouldn't waste a good crisis. Because crisis also brings opportunity, and frankly, we can't afford to waste any more crises. We got some serious issues. But I'm incredibly encouraged because I see huge change happening on the part of both government and communities. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks.